almost impossible to imagine a world where no one ever believed in God or had any idea of some kind of transcendent power. And the reason it's so difficult is because we don't have experience of any time on planet Earth like that. Now, we do have some attempts to eliminate God, but the concept of God has always been there. You can look at, for example, Cuba, Venezuela, or even Russia. Think back during the Gulag days in the Soviet Union, where the idea of God and religion was outlawed. Read Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. It's incredible, the stories that come out of that period of time. But we've never had a world where at least the concept of an intelligent being didn't exist. And so for us, that's a hypothetical that is impossible to imagine. What would it be like to live in a world where there was never a concept of God? In this study, that's part of what we're considering. In the little book that we're using as our launching pad, Paul Little's book called Know Why You Believe is just a launching pad. It kind of takes these very simple ideas and allows us to build on them. The best is yet to come. As to the question of the existence of God, the Apostle Paul makes it clear in Romans, the first chapter, that creation itself makes it plain that there is a God. David, in one of the Psalms, says the heavens declare the glory of God. Creation itself makes it plain. Why is it important to know if God exists? Well, there are a number of reasons, and we're going to be covering a lot of those reasons throughout this entire course, not just for this particular lesson that we're in today. One of the reasons is we get a sense of purpose in our lives, why we are here. And that's the thoughts of this lesson. Yes, I've constantly wondered, first of all, about where my shoes are and a lot of other things too. But especially I've thought deeply, and I think at some point in almost every human being's life, that person has wondered, is there something more? Is there something bigger than us? Is there some intelligence, some sort of personal energy out there that transcends us? I wonder what Adam and Eve thought when they buried their first son. Human beings have this capacity to do second order thinking. That means thinking about thinking. Here's one you won't want to forget.
Who am I? Why am I here?
Now, If you're a little older, you'll remember that was Admiral Stockdale in the 1992 presidential debate where he was running for the vice president position, and he starts off, he's a virtual nobody. Virtually nobody in the country knows who he is. And he starts off by saying, "Who am I? Why am I here?" Think about that just a minute. That's probably the singular most important philosophical, dare I say, theological questions people can ask. That brings us to our first argument that we're really looking at here in chapter 1. This is the second half of the book of chapter 1. And it brings us to our first argument. And the theological name for that argument is teleology, coming from the Greek word telos, which means plan or design. Is there a plan for our lives? Is there a design for our lives? Are we here for a purpose? And that comes from an English professor by the name of William Paley. He wasn't the first to talk about the teleological argument. Among the first were people like Plato and Plato's Socrates, Aristotle, Cicero, Thomas Aquinas, Newton, and so many others. But here's the crux of it. A grand design requires a grand designer. That's foundational philosophy 101. Something cannot come from nothing. And then, is there a design for that something? Paley's argument, when you formally state it, goes like this: from a complex object of many parts containing the qualities of regularity and purpose, we can infer that it was designed. And then he goes on in point 2 to say, ooh, this world is pretty complex, has many parts, contains a lot of qualities of regularity and purpose. So we can infer from that this great design has had to come from a great designer. We're going to talk a little bit later in this class about the fine-tuning of the universe, but it sort of comes out of Paley's teleological argument. So I want you to think about this just a minute. Actually, Anthony Flew brings this up, and he tells the story in the book that we're reading. Two people are walking through the forest or the jungle, and they find a watch on the ground. And one says, look, there's a watch. And the other says, please don't tell me that you think that just because there's a watch there that somebody made that watch, that there is a watch maker. That was Anthony Flew's argument, that there wasn't a designer, that over millions of years, something much more complicated than a watch, a human being, just gradually evolved. And so he talks about this garden in the jungle. And Anthony Flew, by the way, was certainly one of the most, if not the most influential atheistic philosopher of the 20th century. You can read some of the things that I've got about him here. But he brings forth this argument. Two people are walking through the jungle, and it looks like there's a little space where there's some flowers, beautiful flowers, and maybe some weeds too. And one of the travelers says, look, here's a garden. There must be a gardener. And the other traveler says, no, there's no gardener. Well, that's what Anthony Flew is saying, basically. Now, there's no designer to this universe. It's all a cosmic accident. Now, in May 2004, Anthony Flew totally changed his mind. I think that's important that a man of this mental geniusness that the capacity that he had in his intellect, he was talking with two Christians on a televised program at New York City College or University, and he said the other two were talking about God has to exist, God has to exist, and the program narrator came on and he said, listen, even some great thinkers like Albert Einstein appeared on screen, and many of the greatest scientists of all time believe that the intelligence of the universe, its laws, points to an intelligence that has no limitation. And at that point, Flew said, you must be right. Now, I'm paraphrasing here when I quote Flew as saying, I guess I was wrong, there is a God. But the point is, this influential atheistic philosopher, probably the greatest mind of the 20th century, after studying all the facts, came to the conclusion that because of the intricacy of the design, not just of the planet, but of the cosmos, there has to be a great designer. Now, I'm not saying Flew became a Christian. He became a theist. From an atheist, that is not believing in God, he became a theist. And he died not too many years after that, and I'm not sure what his pathway was after that. Well, coming up, I told you a while ago, the best is yet to come, so hang on. Today we looked at the teleological argument. Argument number 2 is going to be one of them that I am the most interested in, and that is the moral argument for the existence of God.